Hey guys, PIEGUYRULZ here, and welcome to my review of the SpongeBob Movie 2, Sponge Out of Water. So first off, let me say that this isn't the first time I've talked about this movie. Back when it came out a few years ago, I did a first impressions vlog as well as some reactions to some of the promotional material leading up to it. My opinion now may not reflect anything that I said in that video. Remember, that was just a first impressions type thing. I had seen the movie exactly once. It was also during a time when I was reviewing SpongeBob Season 6, plus I also went to see it in the theater after a stressful week of classes, so my opinion there might have been inflated by other external factors. What I'm trying to say is that this is my full review, full analysis, final opinion, for now anyway, of the SpongeBob Movie 2 after watching it 3 more times. And actually, I've intentionally avoided seeing this movie again since I did see it in theaters. I've owned it on Blu-ray for a long time, but I explicitly didn't want to watch it until I was going to make this review so that I could try to go into it with as fresh eyes as possible while being incredibly critical now, which I may not have been back then. So the way this review is going to work is that I am going to be breaking the movie down into sequences and talking about each one of them. Then, after every act, I'll give my opinion on the act as a whole, and then at the end, I'll give my opinion on the film as a whole. So, let's dive in. Act 1. So we start off with a live-action pirate guy stealing a book from a skeleton in a brief fight scene. While I would have preferred the movie open with SpongeBob himself, this isn't a bad way to tease the new character and add a little intrigue right off the bat. Then we get introduced to these seagulls that follow him around, and boy are they annoying. It feels like they wanted to write characters in to appeal to the 2-year-olds in the audience. That said, I think a part of the point is that they're supposed to be annoying, and so they aren't really on screen for too long, and the pirate takes multiple jabs at them, so it's all good. Then the pirate guy, Burgerbeard as he is revealed to be later, explaining to the gulls who SpongeBob is and what Plankton's thing is with the formula, which is quite frankly a bit lazy. Explaining to non-fans who SpongeBob is and that Plankton steals the formula a lot isn't necessarily a bad thing in itself, but it should have been woven into the film through character actions, dialogue, cinematography, and other things, and not just point blank told to us. It's not a huge deal, but it's a bit of a slow way to ease us into the film. Contrast it with the first movie, which also opened with pirates, but then right after we're thrown into a tense scene, and then things are pulled back to introduce SpongeBob through his actions of getting ready in the morning. However, this is made up for by the fact that the very next scene really does throw us smack dab into a pretty fantastic action scene in the struggle between Plankton and SpongeBob. This sequence is personally my favorite in the whole film. It's a big, all-out assault by Plankton on the Krusty Krab with condiment ammo and a tank and a robot and a plane and all sorts of crazy fun action. It reminds me a little bit of the opening to One Course Meal, but on a grander scale. It's a great sequence that pulls the audience in with its action and comedy and showcases the animation quite nicely. Using mayo and pickles as weapons is a great SpongeBob-y spin on a war scene and reminds me of a great Krusty idea I had once. So Plankton loses the war because his big giant robot runs out of gas at an inconvenient moment. But it turns out he had a backup plan, or perhaps this was his plan the whole time, which is that a robot version of him gives Krabs a penny with the real Plankton inside of it. A Trojan penny, if you will. Which, honestly, probably should have been Plankton's first plan ever. I mean, really, Mr. Krabs has a pretty glaring weakness in that he's cheap and he loves money, and yet it took Plankton this long to realize that he can use that as a trap, though it won't be the last time. Anyway, Krabs realizes this is a trap, and SpongeBob sees Plankton stealing the formula and tries to stop him. Then the inciting incident happens as the Krabby Patty formula just disappears right in front of SpongeBob's eyes and Plankton's singular eye, which is such a great plot device because it leads to a situation where SpongeBob has to do what's right and try to clear Plankton's name, while it's also understandable that the town would turn on him because obviously no one would believe what really happened. It is a misunderstanding plot, but it's a really good one. Having the town, his friends, and his mentor all turn on him, that's a really great story for the film. The hero has lost all that is important to him just for doing what's right. It sets the film on a clear path for SpongeBob and Plankton to work together to unravel the mystery behind the formula's disappearance. But before that, there is also a really funny torture sequence of Plankton being subjected to SpongeBob's laugh. It's quite clever the way the film lampshades how annoying that element of the show can be sometimes. And the way the gag is set up is a great misdirection. The act comes to an end when SpongeBob and Plankton escape in a giant bubble, much to Mr. Krabs' surprise and frustration. He then tells everyone that the apocalypse is coming without the Krabby Patty. And then it just spontaneously happens. Everyone is wearing apocalypse garb, and the whole town has gone all steampunk looking crazy. And this is a great example of a joke being used to sell a weird plot point. Why exactly does everything have to go crazy without the Krabby Patty? Is this Mr. Krabs' form of marketing and trying to get people to think that they literally need the Krabby Patty to live? The movie itself kind of raises this question as well. And while I have my own personal fan theory that I'll probably share in another video, the fact that they hide this plot point as a joke really works to just sell it. You don't really think too hard about it or point it out as a plot hole or anything because it's a funny gag how everything is just suddenly all apocalyptic. So judging Act 1 as a whole, I have to say that it's pretty fantastic. An amazing way to start off the film. I may not be too crazy about Burger Beard and the Seagulls, but it's not too long before we get to the SpongeBob story, and in that, there's nothing I don't like. It's a solid setup with action, fun, and great comedy. All the characters are likable, and not a single element of SpongeBob episodes can be found. Patrick is genuinely funny, SpongeBob is more relatable and less weird, Krabs is harsh, but you get where he's coming from, and Plankton is as fun as ever. Not only are there a lot of jokes in this first act, but there are also a lot of really funny ones. If I were to list all the ones I liked, we'd be here forever. So instead, I'm just going to talk about a few of my favorites, aside from the torture gag that I already mentioned. I love that Karen is playing solitaire. It took me a few watches to get what the joke there is, but it's because she's a computer, and computers play solitaire. It's never mentioned or drawn any attention to, but it's just a fun little visual pun. I love the joke where Mr. Krabs is saying that Plankton doesn't have much money, and so he says that Plankton is a wee bit broke. The way he's gesturing and the way the sentence is constructed, it sounds like he's going to say that he's a wee bit short and make a pun on Plankton's stature, but instead he doesn't. And it kind of reminds me of a gag from Clams. And I also like the gag where Patrick throws the mayo and then Plankton says it's gonna take a lot more than mayo to stop, and then he's just immediately stopped. You'll notice that a lot of these gags kind of have clever twists to them, or they're very subtle. There's a lot of different layers of humor going on here, which I really like because I think that's one of the charms of the first 3 seasons of the show. You also have a lot of stuff that's just farty sounds. In fact, the farting sound shows up quite a bit. The seagull makes a fart, Plankton's gas hitting 0 makes a fart, the condiments make a fart. But because of the pacing and because there's so many other jokes and so much else going on, I think they're actually the funny kind of fart jokes. Especially the ones that aren't actually farting and are just sound effects. Really, Act 1 plays out like a larger-than-life SpongeBob episode. Everything is given that big screen feeling, from the action to the comedy to the characters. Sure, Burger Beard is in there a little bit, but though I'm not crazy about him, and more on that later, he still brings a bit of mystery and is way better than some of the patchy segments I've seen. In short, Act 1 is phenomenal. So, can Act 2 follow up on Act 1's brilliance? Well, we'll see. So we cut back to Burger Beard and the Seagulls. He closes the book that he's been reading from and tells the Seagulls that's how the story ends. They don't like that, so they hold him hostage by threat of pooping on him and force him to read more of the story. Also, a seagull rips out a page and throws it in the water. At this point, it's still not entirely clear what exactly Burger Beard is doing in this story, other than, I guess, being a weird version of Patchy. But again, the scene is kept pretty short, so while I don't really have anything good to say about it, I don't have anything bad to say about it either. We then get a scene where SpongeBob tries to explain to Plankton that they need to work as a team to get back the formula and save Bikini Bottom. Plankton is unable to say teamwork, and a few funny gags are made out of this. Then we cut to Sandy, because Sandy actually gets to do something in this movie, who sees the apocalypse on the news. She was immune because she still had a Krabby Patty to eat, I guess, before the mysterious page ripped out by the seagull lands on her tree dome. Back to SpongeBob, who starts trying to recruit friends to his TM. He goes to Patrick, but Patrick turns on him because he needs Krabby Patties. So yes, Patrick is a jerk in the movie, like he is pretty much all the time, but luckily I can say that this is a funny jerky Patrick, and not the annoying one. He then goes to Sandy, who has turned into some sort of crazy oracle with papers all over the place, prophesizing that the end times are here because of the giant page that fell from the sky. She's too crazy to help. SpongeBob then returns home and finds that Gary is now king of snails or something. I guess rule of dumb is canon. This is really the only thing Gary gets to do in this movie outside of a tiny thing at the very end, which is honestly fine. This movie does a decent job of involving Mr. Krabs and Sandy and other characters into the narrative, at least a lot better than the first movie did, so leaving out one of the main 7 is absolutely fine, especially because it is Gary. Oh, and as a side note, the art of SpongeBob's destroyed house as well as the tree dome cluttered with papers both look absolutely beautiful. The artwork in this movie is nothing short of gorgeous, but more on that later. So SpongeBob and Plankton decide to hide out just outside of Bikini Bottom, because obviously Krabs wasn't gonna help them, and I don't really know why SpongeBob didn't ask Squidward for help. SpongeBob gets to sleep, and Plankton uses this opportunity to jump inside SpongeBob's brain to look for the formula. Once in there, Plankton discovers that it's a portal to what I can only describe as the amazing world of Gumball's version of Candyland. It blends a few different styles of animation and live action to provide a sweet nightmare for Plankton. I have to say, this scene does absolutely nothing for me. It doesn't add to the movie in any way. We've seen Plankton go inside SpongeBob's brain a number of times at this point, and though yes, it is somewhat creative, I'm just not really thrilled by any of it. I could definitely see some people liking it and the joke about the creepy twins like from The Shining, and I don't think that it's necessarily bad, just kind of pointless. So SpongeBob catches Plankton trying to root through his brain, asking him why he would do such a thing. Plankton says that he assumed the formula was still somewhere in SpongeBob's brain, to which SpongeBob can't believe that Plankton would assume that he's lying about it. And Plankton says that he just lives his life assuming that everyone's lying all the time, to which SpongeBob says that's not really a good way to live life. This scene is actually a really good example of the two characters and their different ideologies. Plankton just assumes the worst in everybody, whereas SpongeBob is diametrically opposite to that, to the point where he even trusts Plankton for some reason. Plankton blows up at SpongeBob and says that he doesn't want to be a part of the team. And then SpongeBob tells Plankton that everything is better when you're part of a team, and then pulls out a pitch pipe, which definitely made me think that SpongeBob was going to start singing Everything is Awesome. But no, instead he and Plankton sing a little song about teamwork, which is definitely reminiscent of the fun song. But I think this is one of those nice cases where it's more of a callback than anything, especially because a core component of this movie seems to kind of be based on fun, teaming up SpongeBob and Plankton. It's similar, but not too similar, so it gets a pass from me, especially because it's a cute little ditty in its own right. Anyway, Plankton comes up with the idea to build a time machine to get the formula back, which makes me think that it's SpongeBob and Plankton from the future that actually stole the formula. But unfortunately, no, that's not what happens. Still though, that would be pretty good, right? Anyway, they have to break into the chum bucket because Karen is the only computer that is powerful enough to initiate time travel. Which leads to my favorite part of the second act, where SpongeBob and Plankton use teamwork to get in through the window, then steal the key from Patrick, lull him back to sleep, and rescue Karen. It's a great sequence that lets Plankton learn firsthand that some things do need to be done as a team. And I especially love Patrick's ridiculous giant belly that Plankton slides down. Also, there's the Bikini Bottomites that really love beating up tires. So we then cut to the taco house, which has never been mentioned before in this movie or the series or anywhere. It's just this taco house that is in this really inexplicable location outside of town. No one else is in it, no one's seen running it, and Plankton acts like this is just a normal place, which really leads me to wonder if there was a scene cut or something. It's not awful, but it's just like weirdly jarring how this taco house is just here without any explanation. Maybe Plankton runs it as a side business and it's just as unsuccessful as the chum bucket? I don't know. Anyway, SpongeBob and Plankton build the time machine in a cute little montage sequence. Then Karen says that to power the time machine, she has to power down. So we get something that I honestly wasn't expecting. An actually sweet scene where Plankton says that he's gonna miss Karen. Sure, he immediately shuts her off afterwards, but he actually gets a tear in his eye and starts to cry a little. I love that they did this. I wish they didn't have that joke in there where he cuts her off by turning her off, but even still, it's actually a sweet little moment, and you wouldn't expect that from SpongeBob. We've had entire episodes that show that Plankton really doesn't care that much about Karen, especially when his true love is trying to obtain the formula. So to have an actual moment in here that shows that he does genuinely care about her, enough to cry about her being powered down, is just a really nice, subtle touch. And it's also cool that Karen gets to do something in the film. Sure, it's not much, but she's in it, she has lines, and she has a purpose. SpongeBob and Plankton travel to 4 days into the future, where everything is turned to dust and only Patrick remains, serving as a grim reminder that the stakes are pretty high. They then travel to some spaceship, I guess, where they find this stop-motion dolphin staring out at the cosmos, saying that he really has to go to the bathroom. So SpongeBob and Plankton watch the cosmos. For some reason, outer space just decides to fall apart. The dolphin gets mad, and SpongeBob and Plankton escape back in the time machine. Okay, Let me talk about this for a bit. I'm just gonna be honest, I am not a fan of this. First of all, how does this time machine even work? Does it just transport them to random places? But okay, fine. The real problem, for me anyway, is just that it's too weird, even for SpongeBob. And the whole scene itself is just kind of there. It's not entirely pointless because the dolphin does come back later in the movie at a very convenient time, but it just feels so out of place. The character's gimmick of stuttering and making dolphin noises really irritates me, and I don't find the humor in this sequence to be funny at all. This also happens in the exact middle of the movie, and it just feels like it slows down the pacing by a lot. Sure, SpongeBob's brain sequence was a bit unnecessary, but I think this is one of the real low points of the film. So eventually, SpongeBob and Plankton end up where they want to be in time, right as Plankton is switching out the real formula with the fake one. SpongeBob and Plankton from the past are confused by present SpongeBob and Plankton's appearance, Plankton especially wondering what other Plankton is doing with SpongeBob, to which SpongeBob says that they're a team. Old Plankton says, "What? A TM?" And then present Plankton says, "We're a team," which is a great way to show the progress that Plankton has made in accepting teamwork. SpongeBob then gets into a little action sequence where he fishes his hand inside the safe to try to get the formula from Plankton, which is intercut with other Plankton and other SpongeBob having this goofy little conversation, which is a neat way to have an action sequence and comedy at the same time. SpongeBob grabs a bottle, and him and Plankton head forward in time. Next up, we get more Burger Beard stuff. His boat transforms into a car, and he drives right through a beach. He then reveals that he's opening up a food truck. So back to SpongeBob and Plankton, who arrive at the Krusty Krab in the present time, and of course it turns out that SpongeBob grabbed the wrong bottle, and the crowd gets really angry. Now, why exactly SpongeBob and Plankton can't just go back in time again and grab the right bottle this time is not really ever explored or explained. But instead, Plankton gets angry at SpongeBob, saying that teamwork has let them down. SpongeBob has a freak out, realizes how low he's sunk, and then gives a truly epic speech set to the song from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. It's actually a pretty rousing speech, and it's cool to see the character go from his lowest point to bouncing right back so quickly, because of course, that's who SpongeBob is. And then he offers to give himself up as a sacrifice to the sandwich gods, which is what the Bikini Bottomites think will end this post-apocalypse. And right as SpongeBob is about to be crushed to death by a giant Krabby Patty, because apparently it wouldn't be a SpongeBob movie without a death fake out, he smells Krabby Patties, and so does Mr. Krabs. So SpongeBob gets off of the chopping block, and the entire town sets out on a journey to find where the smell is coming from. What I don't like about this is how random and easy it is. It's like all this work has been done up to this point in the movie of Plankton and SpongeBob trying to survive and find the Krabby Patty formula and build a time machine and do all this stuff, and it turns out that all of it was kind of pointless. Well, okay, not entirely pointless, because Plankton got character development, which ultimately comes in handy later, and I'm perfectly fine with the characters failing at something. It just feels like SpongeBob suddenly smelling Krabby Patties is a very easy, lazy solution to the problem of where does the story go from here. But I also realize that it is just a plot device to move the movie into Act 3. And though it feels a bit lazy, it's still pretty in tune with SpongeBob's style of having this stuff just kind of randomly happening. And it's definitely not as inexplicable of a solution as Goofy Goober Rock. And that is what I consider to be roughly the end of Act 2. Whereas I have almost no complaints at all about Act 1, Act 2 does have some issues. The whole part with the dolphin really slows down the pace of the movie and is so disconnected from everything, it just kind of takes me out of it. The second act isn't quite as funny as the first act, nor as action-packed, and I've already gone on about how I don't like SpongeBob smelling the Krabby Patties. But honestly, these aren't huge problems, and I still do think that the second act does have good jokes in there, such as Plankton's encounter with Patrick's belly, Mr. Krabs' reaction to reading the fake formula, Squidward's offhanded comment about being able to take off the apocalypse garb, and other jokes. So even though it's not as good as Act 1, I still do think that Act 2 is not bad, but it is a bit mixed. But of course, we're not done yet. Let's move on to Act 3. So SpongeBob and crew realize that the smell is coming from on land. There's some funny dialogue about Patrick not having feet and being jealous of Squidward's 4 feet, before the characters just give up because apparently now they can't go on land. Despite the fact that Sandy can go on land, SpongeBob and Patrick have gone on land, and Mr. Krabs is a crab. Are water helmets just not feasible on land? No, the solution to this is that Bubbles, the dolphin from before, comes back in time to precisely the right moment that he's needed and magically transports SpongeBob and friends to the surface via some CG animation. And for the next few minutes of the movie, we just get a marathon of gags involving the characters interacting with humans and just jokes about how small they are in this human world. These gags were featured a ton in the trailers and promotional material of this movie. So by the time I got around to actually watching the film on opening day, my eyes kinda glazed over at this part. I already knew almost every single gag and moment. But this is the benefit of doing this review now, years after the film has come out. I can actually watch this part of the film as it was intended, with the promos being nothing but a distant memory. And I think the gags are pretty dang funny, and the sequence as a whole flows very nicely from gag to gag. The characters blend with the real world as well. They keep it cartoony, which was a good choice, as hyper-realistic would have gone into Uncanny Valley. And I also like how they handled the interactions with the humans, and that they keep it mostly to just little reactions. It would be really irritating and out of place to have SpongeBob befriend a kid and have him tag along on the adventure or something. So eventually they find Burger Beard. Mr. Krabs actually says that $8.99 for a Krabby Patty is something that he should have thought of, which seems like an offhanded line, but I'm kind of wondering if it's a reference to how the Krabby Patty in a lot of episodes is seen to only be like $3 or $4, which is weird for such a cheapskate money grubber like Mr. Krabs. So Burger Beard is surprised to see them, as them appearing on land is not in his book, and neither is the dolphin. He explains that he was the one that stole the Krabby Patty by rewriting the story. And it's at this point that I really want to talk about Burger Beard and this whole book plotline, because ultimately I think it's the weakest aspect of this movie. Having a human be the antagonist in a film set mostly under the sea comes with one very specific problem. The heroes don't actually get to interact with him until way late into the film, which means that until midway through the third act, the only characters he gets to actually interact with are these seagulls. And they're not really characters either, so much as just a giant mob that's there to harass him. And because it's kind of sort of a twist, even though it's really not thanks to the advertising, it kind of makes his scenes with the seagulls seem a bit odd and out of place. Like, there isn't really a clear purpose for him other than being another Patchy the Pirate breaking up the story. It seems really out of place to have an antagonist who ultimately has no interactions with our heroes until right before they fight him. Like, there have been plenty of movies where there's a twist where a character you don't think is the antagonist, but typically that character is at least a part of the story up until then. And while I do kind of think it's interesting to have the narrator be the villain, they really should have done something to have SpongeBob and other characters have at least a brief interaction with him towards the beginning of the film. The other issue with him only being able to interact with the seagulls is that we don't really get much information about Burger Beard. He has no backstory, and his motivations are vague and generic at best. He mentions wanting power and money and cooking burgers and wanting to destroy Bikini Bottom, but we don't ever actually get to know why. Is he an awful chef that needs the formula to make good food, which is his dream? Is he a pirate that was abandoned by his crew and wants to have respect to stick it to them? Is he just broke because he never found any real treasure? I don't know. There are a lot of fun motivations they could have given him, but instead they just didn't bother. So he really doesn't have much of a character beyond bad guy pirate. Look, in a SpongeBob movie, I wouldn't really expect anything deep or nuanced, but just something would be nice. I do like Antonio Banderas' portrayal of the character, and there are aspects of this that I like the twist that the narrator was the villain the whole time, but I don't think it was executed particularly well. Another issue with Burger Beard is that he's just one guy. Like, the whole theme of the movie is that you need to use teamwork to overcome great challenges, but at the end of the day, the villain is just one guy. Why does it really take a huge team to take him down? The film would be greatly improved if Burger Beard had a pirate crew, even if it was only one or two other guys. That way it would seem like a much more credible threat. We could get more dialogue between them to learn more about Burger Beard, and I don't know, it just seems so out of place to have a pirate who doesn't have any crew. And then there's this whole magical book thing. There's not a single line of dialogue in this entire movie that explains where this book came from, why it has SpongeBob's story in it, how Burger Beard knew of its existence, how he knew that he could actually rewrite the story in it, how he knew that the story in it was even real in the first place, why when he wrote the end it wasn't actually the ending, why the dolphin wasn't in the story. And if the book could do anything, then of course why didn't he just write that he had a copy of the Krabby Patty formula? Or just skip the middleman altogether and write that he had power and fortune or whatever it is he actually wanted. I'm probably thinking a little bit too much about this, but the fact that the story never never actually explains this inexplicable book, even in passing, is definitely an oversight. Thankfully, the rest of the movie is enjoyable enough that you typically wouldn't think too much about it, but man, once you do start to realize how weird it is, the questions just keep coming. Okay, back to the recap. Burgerbeard writes that the heroes are teleported to this tiny sliver of land that a bunch of pelicans are circling, ready to eat the characters. It's a wonderfully tense scene as they scramble to figure out what they should be doing next while trying to avoid the pelicans. What is ultimately just a brief but necessary bit of dialogue that could have really taken place anywhere is elevated into a mini action scene which ups the desperation of the crew and raises the stakes even higher. Sandy pulls out that page from the book that she conveniently had on her, and SpongeBob uses it to write in an ending that includes superheroes. I really wish they had done a better job setting this up. At no point in this movie are superheroes even mentioned until SpongeBob and crew turns into them. Now don't get me wrong, the hero stuff in the movie is beautifully animated and action-packed, but that doesn't excuse how random it is. The only thing that it has to do with anything is that the theme is teamwork, and superheroes coming together form a team. But by that logic, they could have been turned into a football team and tackled Burgerbeard into submission. No, the real reason the characters are heroes is that the Avengers are really hot right now, and Viacom wants to ride that sweet wave by shanghaiing this into a superhero film. Now, I don't know that for certain, but I'm pretty sure that's the reason. Really, my main complaint, though, is just that it doesn't have any foreshadowing, which is bizarre because there are superheroes that are regular characters on the show. Now, yes, I know that this movie was made after Ernest Borgnine has passed away, and that could make including Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy a little bit tricky, but there certainly still would have been many ways to have included them. In fact, there's a deleted scene where Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy cameo in SpongeBob's Teamwork song. But I would have gone further than that, maybe having SpongeBob showing off to Plankton that he has some sort of Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy gear because they're his favorite superhero team and that they're the pinnacle of what teamwork really is. Well, unless you believe this episode. But really, there should have been at least a few lines in there about Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy being a team, regardless of how you insert it. That way it would have foreshadowed the superhero thing later on, and maybe could have been a good example of teamwork for SpongeBob to use to show Plankton. To be clear though, my complaint is just that they did not blend it with the rest of the film better. Because if you hadn't seen all of the promotional material, it would have come out of complete left field that these characters are now suddenly superheroes. Especially because their villain isn't a supervillain, he's a pirate. Why weren't they turned into a pirate team? So most of the rest of the movie is this big, long superhero battle between SpongeBob, Mr. Krabs, Patrick, Sandy, Squidward, and Burgerbeard. And I honestly have no complaints. Yes, it is a bit of a long fight scene, but I don't think it ever gets boring or dull or too drawn out. Yes, it would have been nicer for there to have been more characters for the gang to fight than just Burgerbeard. But the movie does, in fairness, at least make it seem like Burgerbeard is strong enough to fight all of these characters with his crazy decked out ship. I don't really have much to say about anything specifically, so I'm not going to give a scene-by-scene recap here, but just know that even though its inclusion in the movie is a bit strange and not handled well, there is really nothing I don't like about this whole fight scene. So the characters put up a good fight, but individually they are all taken down by Burgerbeard until it turns out that Plankton, who has been stowing away in SpongeBob's sock, has turned himself into the Incredible Plank, or Plankton. They put the Plankton in the Hulk body, you get the idea. Shows up at the last minute to beat up Burgerbeard and save the day. Burgerbeard begs Plankton to join his team, but Plankton says that he's already on one. The characters go to do hands in the middle, with Plankton hesitating for a second looking at the formula, but he does give it over to Krabs, saying that it's selfish for him to want to keep the formula all to himself. Even though it's not really, because he'd still be selling Krabby Patties, and by that logic, Mr. Krabs is also selfish for keeping the formula, but whatever. SpongeBob writes for everything to go back to the way it was before, with all the characters back at the Krusty Krab eating patties, and it's nice that Squidward also gets a happy ending as SpongeBob lets him keep his abs. Gary shows up again, but no, it's actually Plankton in disguise, once again trying to steal the formula, because this is how you put everything back to the way it was. Which, I get why they did this, to have it line back up with the show and not have a weird situation like the SpongeBob Movie 1, which technically takes place after the entire series and also makes this a prequel technically. But of course I would have preferred if they had just omitted that. Give Plankton a little happy ending and then have him inexplicably back to stealing the formula in the show, because continuity at this point means pretty much nothing. And that's the end. Except it's not, because we're back to Burgerbeard on the island with the seagulls, who start to sing the SpongeBob song before they're interrupted by the dolphin, who then starts an epic rap battle against them. You know, the taco house was random, the dolphin in and of itself is random, superheroes are random, but this, I mean, just what do you even say? And it was made by the actual people who make epic rap battles of history, which is usually a really good series, but it's just so bizarre seeing this rap battle at the end of the movie, not even between any characters that I actually care about, but instead these seagulls and the dolphin. Like, why would they do an epic rap battle for characters who are new to the movie? If you wanted to do a battle between plankton and crabs, yeah, that would be weird and random, but I don't know, maybe that could actually be cool. This, though, I don't know. The whole sequence is kinda cringy, to be honest, and an odd way to end the film. And it's before the credits, too. It's not like this is just a little bonus during the credits. So Act 3 is pretty dang solid. I don't think it's quite as enjoyable as Act 1, but I think it is definitely up there. My main complaints were more of things that they didn't do than things that they did. Because if you took Act 3 and separated it from the rest of the movie, as it stands on its own, it's really great. I wish it could have blended a little better with the other acts, and I do wish that Burger Beard had gotten more backstory earlier on, but other than that, I don't have anything bad to say. The characters look really good in regular CG form and in their superhero CG form, and they blend really nicely with the real world. The action is very well done, the gags are typical SpongeBob fun, and some of my favorites are SpongeBob and Patrick at the cotton candy, the reveal of the giant squirrel that is Sandy, and Krabs getting buttered. Similarly to Act 1, almost the entire third act is nothing but action and motion. It's a very fluid half hour, as both the long gag sequence and the big action sequence have a lot of fun movement. Alright, now for the verdict. What do I think about this movie? It is, in fact, a good movie. Honestly, the film is very enjoyable from start to, well, right before that rap battle. Though of course I have my critiques, the film as a whole is an absolute blast. I highly recommend it, and personally, I prefer it to the first film. I think it's just a better movie. It has many memorable and fun sequences, stunningly good animation both in 2D and 3D, a mostly solid story, it isn't overly immature, and most importantly, it's very funny. And there's plenty of nods to specific episodes and characters like Bubble Bass, Fun, and the My Leg gag. Of course, it's certainly not perfect. I think that Burger Beard could have been a better antagonist, the book could have been better explained, the superhero thing could have been set up a lot better, and other parts of the film could have blended together to be less jarring and more seamless, but these are very specific issues that only affect small parts of the film, and on the whole, it is a thoroughly fun experience. The last critique that I want to bring up, though, is that the film is oddly similar to the first one. They both include live-action pirates, a big journey to the surface, a live-action villain. They're both Plankton episode movies. There's an original character that pops up to help the characters make the journey to the surface, and towards the end, their way back home is almost ruined. It's not too similar by any stretch of the imagination, it's just a bit odd that there are these similarities at all in the first place. Like, there's only ever gonna be so many SpongeBob movies. Why would you want any two of them to even have that much in common? The most egregious here is definitely SpongeBob coming to the surface for the first time, because that was already an interesting thing about the first movie. Not to mention Pressure, Rodeo Days, Mooncation, or any other time that SpongeBob went to the surface. It's a bit odd, not too big a deal. But I tell you, if the SpongeBob Movie 3 has these things in common, then it's gonna be a problem. And now, before I end this, I want to talk about the worst aspect of this movie that is also not actually an aspect of the movie itself, that is the advertising. So fans of the show know that SpongeBob trailers and promos have historically been awful. They either exaggerate what the episode is about in order to make it sound more exciting and epic than it is, highlight a joke and act like it's the funniest thing ever, which runs the gag into the ground, or just flat out lie, like in the case of Truth or Square. The SpongeBob Movie 2, however, took it beyond any of these things and made a few horrible mistakes. First of all, like 85 to 90% of the advertising featured the 3D CG animation for a film that's over 60% traditional animation. And because of this, mistake number 2 is that they ran the surface gags into the ground. Because when the advertisements are mostly CG and there's not actually that much CG, they're gonna keep repeating the same stuff again and again in different promos. And mistake number 3 was that they hugely spoiled superheroes and Burger Beard being the villain. It's quite paradoxical, actually. The movie does a terrible job of setting up superheroes, but the promos make sure you have to know that there is going to be superheroes in this film. I mean, literally, the cover. It even includes Plankton, which was supposed to be another twist. So yeah, the advertising was just miserable on a number of fronts. And that is my review on the SpongeBob Movie 2. And if nothing else, this is something that I think the current era of the show actually did better than the original run of the show, which is very much not common. And speaking of not being common, this movie is sadly a rarity in that it mostly features traditional animation. I mean, how many films since 2010 have actually done that? Winnie the Pooh and, you know, there's probably some others, but since I can't think of any, it's definitely not many. Which, of course, I think is very unfortunate. So I hope you enjoyed this review, and with that, PIEGUYRULZ, out.